Welcome to our immigration briefing show. Today, we're diving into some intense legal and political developments. First up, a U.S. judge has temporarily blocked the deportation of unaccompanied Guatemalan children, citing safety and legal concerns. This order, which lasts for 14 days, aims to protect vulnerable minors from potential harm as their cases are reviewed. It's a big win for advocates fighting for children's rights amid ongoing deportation plans. Next, things got heated in Sydney after an anti-immigration rally turned violent. Clashes erupted between protesters and counter-demonstrators, with police using pepper spray and arrests being made. The rally, organized by groups like March for Australia, also saw some neo-Nazi influences, sparking serious concerns about rising far-right sentiments in the country. The protests drew thousands and highlighted the ongoing debate over immigration and national identity. Finally, in Australia's political arena, a controversial deal with Nauru is underway to offshore and deport around 350 migrants. This move follows a high court ruling against indefinite detention, but critics say it's just shifting the problem out of sight. The partnership has been criticized for human rights issues, and the protests across Australia show the deep divisions on immigration policies. Please stay tuned for more detailed insights. BBC reports that a U.S. judge temporarily halted the Trump administration's attempt to deport dozens of unaccompanied Guatemalan children, who arrived in the U.S. alone and are under government custody. The judge, Sparkle Suknanen, responded to reports that children were being loaded onto planes destined for Guatemala, where advocacy groups argued they risked abuse and persecution. The court's order, which lasts for 14 days, was prompted by emergency legal actions from immigrant advocacy groups, highlighting concerns that the deportations violated protections intended for vulnerable migrant children. During the hearing, officials claimed the flights were for family reunifications, not deportations, but advocates disputed these assertions, emphasizing the children's fears and pending immigration cases. The scene at the border was tense, with active buses, federal agents, and grounded planes, illustrating the high-stakes nature of this legal battle amid the broader immigration enforcement efforts under the Trump administration. The Toronto Star details that the same legal action extended across multiple states, with courts in Arizona and Illinois also intervening to prevent deportations. Advocates voiced alarm over potential violations of federal laws protecting unaccompanied minors, as the government appeared poised to send children back to Guatemala without proper legal procedures. The scene at the Texas border was bustling with activity, as authorities prepared for possible departures, despite the court orders. The administration's plan involved nearly 700 Guatemalan minors, with Guatemala expressing readiness to accept them, raising diplomatic and humanitarian concerns. Lawyers argued that the U.S. lacked authority to deport these children without due process, citing active asylum cases and fears of harm if returned. Meanwhile, Guatemala's government, led by President Bernardo Arevalo, emphasized its moral obligation to protect these minors, especially as U.S. officials, including Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, visited Guatemala recently, adding a diplomatic layer to the ongoing crisis. The Associated Press reports that a federal judge in Washington issued an emergency injunction against the deportation of Guatemalan children, with a scheduled hearing to determine the next steps. This legal intervention came amid reports that children were being prepared for flights to Guatemala, prompting widespread concern among immigrant advocates. The scene at the border was chaotic, with buses and planes ready for departure, yet court orders temporarily halted these actions. Advocates across the country, including legal organizations like the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights, argued that the government was violating laws designed to protect children, especially those who had fled trauma and sought asylum. The U.S. government maintained that the children were being reunited with family members, but advocates disputed this, citing ongoing court cases and fears of harm. The situation underscores the intense clash between immigration enforcement and legal protections, as the U.S. plans to remove nearly 700 Guatemalan minors, with Guatemala expressing willingness to accept them, further complicating the diplomatic and humanitarian dimensions of this crisis. The Sydney Morning Herald vividly depicts a city embroiled in chaos following a series of anti-immigration protests, which culminated in violent clashes on the streets. In Chippendale, police responded swiftly to a pub brawl where a police officer was assaulted by two men, Matthew Smith and Sean Rayx, both believed to have attended the rally earlier that day. The violence extended to a train station, where a man draped in an Australian flag was caught on video jabbing another man with a Eureka Stockade flag amid a heated altercation. Melbourne also saw unrest, with 7 arrests made during protests that turned tumultuous, including a woman charged for shouting abuse at a pro-Palestine march. The day was marked by a police presence amidst a flurry of confrontations, highlighting the tense atmosphere surrounding the protests. CNN captures the broader national picture, illustrating how thousands of Australians rallied across multiple cities against immigration policies, which the government condemned as divisive and linked to neo-Nazi groups. The March for Australia rallies drew between 5,000 and 8,000 participants in Sydney and similar demonstrations in Melbourne and Queensland, where protesters voiced fears of overpopulation and strain on resources. These protests, organized by online groups, were marred by allegations of neo-Nazi involvement, with some speakers and members openly displaying symbols and chanting slogans like "Heil Australia" and "Blood and Honor." Counter-protesters expressed their disgust at the far-right agenda, staging their own rallies to oppose the hate-driven narratives. The government's swift legislative response, including laws banning Nazi salutes and symbols, underscores the tense climate fueled by rising far-right extremism and anti-Semitic attacks since the escalation of the Israel-Gaza conflict. The Sydney Morning Herald further details the disturbing presence of neo-Nazi elements within the anti-immigration rallies, where banners, leaflets, and chants explicitly promoted white supremacy. Despite organizers claiming their protests were not linked to such groups, the evidence was undeniable, with neo-Nazi members taking the stage and leading chants of "Heil Australia," while handing out leaflets advocating for "White Australia." The rally was a sea of Australian flags, with some attendees supporting a temporary halt on immigration, citing concerns over housing, healthcare, and infrastructure. Prominent figures, including Libertarian MP John Ruddock, voiced support for a 5-year pause, amid chants of "Send them back" from the crowd. The event highlighted the dangerous normalization of far-right rhetoric in Australia, with white supremacy groups actively participating and attempting to sway public sentiment under the guise of patriotic protests. The Washington Post reports that firefighters are raising concerns about the role of leadership in a recent immigration raid in Washington, questioning whether officials properly coordinated or oversaw the operation. The firefighters, who were involved in the response, expressed doubts about the decision-making process and the safety measures taken during the raid, suggesting that the leadership may have overlooked critical protocols. This controversy highlights the tension between law enforcement agencies and emergency responders, especially when operations involve sensitive immigration enforcement, raising questions about accountability and the impact on community safety. South China Morning Post describes a significant legal setback for the Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies, as a federal judge temporarily halted efforts to expand the expedited deportation process. The judge, Jia Cobb, emphasized that the government's push to swiftly remove undocumented migrants without providing due process violates constitutional protections under the Fifth Amendment. The ruling was a response to the administration's attempt to accelerate deportations for individuals in the interior of the country, a move that civil rights groups argue risks wrongful removals and undermines legal rights. The decision underscores the ongoing legal battles over immigration enforcement and the balance between national security and individual rights, especially as the administration aims to deport millions. Yahoo US reports a recent court ruling that has temporarily blocked the deportation of hundreds of Guatemalan children, a move that has sparked relief among advocates and affected families. The judge's decision was based on concerns that the government's deportation procedures were too abrupt and lacked adequate safeguards for vulnerable minors, many of whom had entered the U.S. seeking asylum or under humanitarian parole. This legal intervention exposes the harsh realities faced by immigrant children caught in a complex legal system that often prioritizes enforcement over compassion. It also raises awareness about the urgent need for policies that protect the rights and well-being of minors amid ongoing debates over immigration reform and border security. Associated Press reports that the Department of Homeland Security is planning to increase its immigration enforcement efforts in Chicago, deploying additional ICE resources amid ongoing political tensions. This escalation comes after the DHS requested logistical support from nearby military installations and follows a pattern of federal mobilizations in major cities such as Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. Chicago's political leaders, including Mayor Brandon Johnson and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, have responded defensively, emphasizing that crime has decreased and threatening legal action if federal forces move forward. The city's strong local regulations against cooperation with federal immigration enforcement further complicate the situation, with officials suspecting political motives behind the federal crackdown and fearing it could influence upcoming elections, as Pritzker speculated about potential political interference. CBC details how Trump's aggressive immigration policies have transformed Washington, D.C.'s vibrant immigrant community into a ghost town. The deployment of federal law enforcement and National Guard troops on August 7 created a climate of fear, leading local residents and business owners to drastically alter their routines. Families like Fernanda Rivas's, who owns bakeries in Columbia Heights, now face decreased patronage and economic hardship because immigrants and locals alike are too frightened to venture outside. The surge in deportations, which has reached approximately 185,000 since Trump took office, has heightened anxiety among immigrant workers, many with legal status, who now fear sudden arrests and separation from their families. For undocumented immigrants like Elizabeth and Adriana, daily life is a constant struggle to survive without legal protections, even as some, like Jelver Mazariegos, carry their IDs everywhere, trying to prove their citizenship amid the heightened tensions. Australian Broadcasting Corporation covers the contentious anti-immigration rallies across Australia, which have often turned violent and drawn police intervention. Protesters, some associated with neo-Nazi groups like the National Socialist Network, have clashed with counter-demonstrators, leading to arrests and chaos in cities like Melbourne, Adelaide, and Sydney. The rallies, branded by organizers as efforts to slow migration, have included racist slogans and provocative speeches, sparking widespread condemnation from politicians and community leaders. Federal officials, including MP Bob Katter, have invoked historical resistance against oppression, while others like Shadow Attorney General Julian Leeser have warned against the anti-immigrant rhetoric that fuels hate and division. Counter-protests emphasizing multiculturalism and inclusivity have emerged as a response, but the atmosphere remains tense, with police maintaining a heavy presence to prevent further violence and to uphold Australia's reputation as a diverse and welcoming nation. The Sydney Morning Herald reports on Australia's ongoing, covert offshore refugee processing arrangement, revealing how the government continues to sidestep legal and human rights standards by secretly striking deals with Nauru to send unwanted migrants there. Despite a 2023 High Court ruling declaring indefinite detention unconstitutional, Australia has devised a new agreement to transfer approximately 350 asylum seekers to Nauru in exchange for hundreds of millions of dollars, with legislation that strips away due process rights to facilitate this process. Historically, Nauru was once considered as a potential Australian relocation site in the 1960s, but the plan was abandoned due to Nauruans' desire to maintain their identity and sovereignty. Today, the island's economy heavily depends on Australia's lucrative offshore processing industry, which has been marred by allegations of human rights abuses, corruption, and coercion. Critics, including former detainees and scholars, argue that Australia's offshore detention regime perpetuates colonial exploitation and undermines international standards, with Nauru caught in a dangerous cycle of economic dependency and moral compromise driven by Australia's regional strategic interests, especially its concerns over China's influence. Meanwhile, the same publication details a surge in anti-immigration protests across Australia, with thousands rallying in Western Australia and other states, expressing fears of cultural dilution and advocating for stricter migration controls. The Perth rally, attended by around 10,000 people, was relatively peaceful but featured controversial figures like One Nation's Rod Caddies, who praised the nation's patriotism, despite criticism from anti-racism advocates emphasizing the importance of diversity. In contrast, protests in Melbourne turned violent, with clashes between protesters and counter-protesters, neo-Nazi groups, and police injuries, highlighting the deep divisions surrounding immigration debates. Prominent political figures like Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts addressed the crowds, claiming that mass migration threatens Australian identity, while authorities condemned these rallies for fostering hatred and division. The protests reflect a broader national tension over immigration policies, racial tensions, and the rise of far-right sentiments, with mainstream politicians warning against the influence of neo-Nazi groups and emphasizing the need for respectful, inclusive discussions on Australia's future. The Independent reports that Stephen King, the acclaimed author known for his horror novels, has shared a compelling theory about how Donald Trump's presidency will be remembered in history. King, who has been openly critical of Trump, describes his time in office as a horror story, and predicts that in 30 years, many people will deny ever voting for him, much like the way some claim to have witnessed Bobby Thompson's legendary 1951 home run despite only a small crowd being present. King reflects on the distortion of truth, noting that the current political climate resembles a dystopian nightmare with armed ICE agents patrolling streets under the guise of law enforcement, a scene he believes would have been unthinkable in the past. He expresses a desire for Trump's impeachment as a fitting conclusion to this dark chapter, contrasting it with the bad ending of a third term for Trump that would allow him to take over completely. King's predictions extend beyond politics, touching on his work's prophetic nature, his 1979 novel, The Dead Zone, is often seen as foretelling Trump's rise, and he emphasizes the surreal, horror-like reality of America's current state, calling it a horror story that only time will fully reveal. Despite the controversy, King feels a moral obligation to speak his truth, aware of the polarized support Trump still garners, but committed to clarity and honesty in his commentary. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.
News breaks, buzz the ground, stories spin, walls come down, voices merge in the sound, faces mix in the crowd. Broadcasters paint the scene, world events on our screen, every link a different theme, words collide in the stream. 6 degrees connect the dots, background stories more than us. The voices rise aloft, truth unveils in every spot. Cultures clash across the globe, spin the threads in a strobe. Every story wears a robe, truth and lies in their code. Journalists dig real deep, secrets out, they don't sleep. Every angle they will keep, in the news we take a leap. New perspectives day by day, hidden truths come to play. In the background shades of gray,